On October 14, 1943, high above Schweinfurt, Germany, at a dizzying altitude of 24,000 feet, German pilot Hetman Heinz gripped the controls of his Messerschmitt Bf-109G6 fighter. Through the thick armored glass of his cockpit, he witnessed a sight that defied his comprehension. His diary entry that evening conveyed a mix of awe and despair. The sky is filled with them. From horizon to horizon, nothing but bombers. We are like pathetic insects daring to attack eagles. That autumn day, like a silver river streaming towards the heart of the Reich, 291 Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress bombers of the U.S. 8th Air Force carved their path in strict combat formations, echeloned at altitudes ranging from 23,000 to 27,000 feet. Their aluminum bodies gleamed in the morning sun. Each of these aerial giants was armed with 13 heavy 0.50 caliber machine guns, capable of creating a deadly curtain of lead in the sky. However, it wasn't merely the sheer number of the American armada that chilled Heinz's blood. He had faced large enemy formations before. It was the terrifying realization that increasingly dawned on Luftwaffe pilots in the war's final months. These 291 bombers likely constituted only a third of the US heavy bomber forces stationed in England. The day before, Heinz's squadron had participated in the destruction of 62 American bombers during the first Schweinfurt raid, a record single-day victory for the Luftwaffe. Yet, the Americans returned, and this time there were even more, as if their previous losses held no significance. Behind Knoke, an impressive armada of 300 German fighters gathered, like a steel swarm ready to descend upon the enemy. In this deadly formation, one could distinguish the legendary Messerschmitt Bf-109s, the swift Focke-Wulf FW-190s, twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf-110s, and even the outdated but still dangerous Junkers Ju-87 Stuka ground attack aircraft. This formidable aerial fleet represented virtually every combat-ready fighter Germany could muster within a 400-kilometer radius. Knoke fully understood that this immense force was Germany's last hope, and that knowledge made his hands tremble slightly in anticipation of the coming attack. He knew there would be no second wave, no reserves, while the Americans, as intelligence reports confirmed, were producing 500 new bombers every month. The turning point in the air war had occurred 18 months earlier, though few in the Luftwaffe High Command realized it at the time. In January 1942, the first American B-17E heavy bombers from the 97th Bomb Group arrived in England. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring scoffed at the news, declaring that American boys don't know how to fight, and their bombers were merely furniture vans that would fall apart under combat load. Major Johannes Mackie Steinhoff, then commanding JG-77 in North Africa, would later write in his memoirs that the Luftwaffe's dismissive attitude toward American air power was the most catastrophic intelligence error of the war. He had personally encountered American-made aircraft in British service and found them surprisingly robust. Steinhoff noted that Americans built planes much like cars, with interchangeable parts, simplified systems, and in quantities that astonished the European imagination. The first signs of the impending threat appeared on August 17, 1942, when a squadron of 18 B-17 bombers struck the Rouen-Sotteville marshalling yards in France. Rudolf Plantz, then leading 11JJ2, a squadron specializing in high-altitude interception and equipped with Bf-109G-1 fighters featuring pressurized cabins, participated in these engagements before his death on July 31st, 1942. His reports from May and June 1942, discovered in post-war Luftwaffe archives, professionally noted with alarm, despite severe damage, the aircraft maintained formation. One B-17 returned to base with about 200 bullet holes from cannon fire. The defensive fire was deadly and highly coordinated. However, it was the production figures that should have caused serious concern for the German High Command. The 18 bombers mentioned represented only a fraction of 2 days' output from American factories. In comparison, the entire German aircraft industry in 1942 produced only 1,549 aircraft of all types, including fighters, bombers, transport and training planes. Meanwhile, the Boeing factory in Seattle alone was approaching production rates that by mid-1944 would reach an impressive 16 B-17s per day. The tragic mission of October 14, 1943, aimed at destroying vital ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt, went down in history as Black Thursday for the American Air Forces. On this day, the Americans suffered devastating losses, with 60 bombers and over 650 crew members lost. For the German Luftwaffe, it was a moment of triumph, yet also a dawning realization of impending defeat. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, commander of JG-1, displayed heroism by shooting down 2 B-17s, but fell in combat under fire from a third bomber. His wingman, Feldwebel Stefan Lithiens, who survived, relayed Philipp's last words, full of bitterness and foresight. "These are not the same Americans we fought 6 months ago. Their fire is lethally accurate. They hold formation under any assault, and from Berlin we hear only empty assurances that this is just the beginning." The Luftwaffe rejoiced, claiming the destruction of 60 and damage to 17 enemy bombers, the most impressive result of the entire war. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels quickly declared it proof of Fortress Europe's impregnability. However, the pilots who fought through the dense defensive fire understood the true cost of victory. They had expended almost all their ammunition, lost 38 fighters, had 30 damaged, and suffered 28 pilots killed or wounded, nearly a quarter of their attacking force. But the worst was yet to come. Within 48 hours, American reconnaissance aircraft confirmed damage to the Schweinfurt factories. A week later, 240 new B-17s arrived in England from America, and 2 weeks after that, the 8th Air Force launched another massive strike involving 378 bombers, surpassing the scale of the Schweinfurt mission. In his memoirs, Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Wutz Galland, who led the WHO, JG-26, and was the brother of the famous Adolf Galland, bitterly stated, "We are like Sisyphus doomed to eternal toil. Every enemy bomber we shoot down is immediately replaced by 2 new aircraft. Every lost pilot is replaced by an inexperienced youngster with barely 20 hours of fighter flight time." The Americans, disregarding losses, prepare thousands of new crews, while we desperately scrape together the remnants of our reserves. The winter of 1943-1944 brought some respite due to unfavorable weather conditions that hindered deep raids. However, this period also saw the emergence of alarming intelligence reports circulating among the Luftwaffe's senior ranks. These documents, many of which were preserved intact after the war, attested to a colossal industrial potential far exceeding anything Germany could have imagined. The Ford Willow Run plant in Michigan achieved what German industrial experts considered impossible: the assembly line production of heavy bombers. This colossal complex, covering 3.5 million square feet and employing 42,000 workers, achieved incredible productivity. In April 1944, at its peak, the factory produced a finished B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes, operating 24,7. In total, this single plant manufactured 6,952 fully equipped aircraft, along with kits for assembling another 1,893 planes, totaling an impressive 8,865 bombers. In December 1943, Oberst Joseph Pips Priller, commander of JG-26, acquired a captured American technical manual, and his analysis of the situation was disheartening for German aviation. In his report to Fighter Command, he emphasized that the new B-17G variant was equipped with 13 machine guns, including a chin turret specifically designed to neutralize frontal attacks by German fighters. Priller bitterly concluded that the Americans had anticipated everything and meticulously planned every detail, which spoke volumes about their immense resources and capabilities. At that time, American industry was gaining momentum. Boeing plants in Seattle and Wichita were nearing peak production of 363 B-17 bombers per month. Douglas, at its facilities in Long Beach and Oklahoma City, added another 400 B-24 bombers. Consolidated with plants in San Diego and Fort Worth, supplied another 300 aircraft. Martin in Baltimore produced 200 B-26 medium bombers, and North American in Kansas City manufactured 400 B-25 bombers. Republic, located on Long Island, produced 400 P-47 fighters monthly. While the American aviation industry demonstrated impressive production volumes, Germany, by the end of 1943, was producing an average of 1,600 single-engine fighters per month. However, due to incessant bombing of production facilities, actual deliveries were significantly below planned figures, placing German aviation at a severe disadvantage. Between February 20th and 25, 1944, Operation Argument, known as Big Week, unfolded. This event vividly demonstrated the overwhelming power of American air superiority, shattering the last hopes of the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. On February 20th, Headman Heinz, leading JG-1, took off from Rheine Airfield to intercept a large formation approaching from the west, as reported by radar. Climbing to an altitude of approximately 20,000 feet, he encountered a colossal armada of 1,030 American heavy bombers, escorted by 835 fighters, stretching 200 miles across the sky. "I witnessed Germany's twilight," he wrote in his diary that evening. "The sky was darkened by their numbers. Our 12 fighters attacked a formation that stretched beyond sight. It was like a dozen men throwing themselves against an entire army. We probably shot down 6 bombers, but they barely noticed." During Big Week, American air forces conducted 3,800 bomber sorties and 2,548 fighter sorties. Losses amounted to 226 bombers and 28 fighters, yet these losses were replenished within 2 weeks. The Luftwaffe suffered far more severe casualties, losing 262 fighters and, most tragically, about 100 experienced pilots, which constituted 14% of its total fighter force. These losses proved irreplaceable as training schools, experiencing acute shortages of fuel and instructors, graduated pilots with less than 50 total flying hours. As the tide of war turned, the inspector of day fighters, Oberstleutnant Hannes Trautloft, presented a merciless analysis of the situation. His words sounded like a death sentence. American pilots entered combat with impressive experience, over 200 flight hours, 75 of which were on a specific aircraft type. In contrast, German recruits could boast only a meager 40 hours, or even just 10 hours on a fighter. Trautloft was unyielding. These were not pilots, but doomed victims. March 4th, 1944, heralded the inevitable collapse. On this day, American P-51 Mustang fighters appeared over Berlin for the first time. P-51Bs from the 4th Fighter Group escorted bombers on a daring 100-mile round-trip raid deep into Germany. The psychological effect of this event was devastating. Major Günther Hull, commander of the Theiss, JG-11, and the third highest-scoring German ace with 275 victories, first encountered the Mustangs during a subsequent raid on March 6th. His combat report, carefully preserved in the Bundesarchiv, stated, "The P-51 surpassed the Bf-109G in speed at all altitudes, maneuverability in turns, and dive speed. The Mustang's ammunition seemed limitless compared to the meager 60 seconds of cannon fire available to German pilots. Most importantly, the P-51's range allowed it to escort bombers anywhere in Germany. Roll was disheartened. Germany had nothing that could compare to this machine. With the advent of the Packard-built Merlin engine and laminar flow wing, the Mustang achieved an impressive range. With drop tanks, it could cover 1,150 miles, allowing it to escort bombers deep into Germany and remain in combat over the target for half an hour. German pilots, accustomed to escort fighters turning back at a certain distance, now faced fresh American aircraft over Prague, Vienna, and even Warsaw. Lieutenant Franzler, a veteran of 400 combat missions, described the new situation in a letter to his brother. "The Mustangs hang over us like hawks, waiting for the moment. As soon as we climb to attack the bombers, they dive on us at over 500 miles per hour. While we evade their attacks, the bombers escape. If we do pursue the bombers, the Mustangs destroy us from the rear. It's systematic extermination." By April 1944, the US 8th Air Force could send up to 1,000 bombers escorted by 800 fighters on raids, and such operations were conducted regularly. The mathematics of war were simple and unforgiving. In April 1944, facing an impending catastrophe, General of Fighters Adolf Galland presented a report to Adolf Hitler, outlining with disheartening bluntness the scale of Allied military-industrial superiority. The figures provided by the general revealed a colossal disparity in production capabilities. American industry was producing over 3,000 bombers and more than 4,000 fighters monthly. Simultaneously, American flight schools were graduating over 30,000 pilots each month. In comparison, Germany produced only about 1,600 fighters per month, with actual deliveries even lower due to incessant bombing. German pilot training also left much to be desired. Only 500 graduates per month, whose qualifications did not meet the demands of the time. German aviation suffered heavy losses, losing over 400 pilots monthly. As Galland himself recalled, he reported to Hitler that the enemy was rolling in waves, replacing every loss with an excess. For every bomber we destroy, they send 3. For every fighter we shoot down, they send 5. We are not fighting an air force, we are fighting an air industry. However, instead of a sober assessment, Hitler erupted in a furious tirade, accusing the general of treason and cowardice. He ordered any pilot who broke off an attack to be court-martialed and demanded that pilots ram enemy bombers, which would inevitably lead to even greater losses among the experienced and irreplaceable veterans of the Luftwaffe. The tragic fates of individual Luftwaffe pilots during the final period of the war vividly demonstrate the immense psychological pressure experienced by German aces, forced to wage a losing battle against vastly superior enemy forces. Hauptmann Robert Weiss, commander of the 3rd JG-44, an ace with 121 aerial victories, fell in combat on December 29, 1944, a victim of an American P-51 fighter. His last letter to his wife, written shortly before his death, conveyed despair. "Every day our ranks thin, planes and pilots become fewer. Young pilots arriving from training centers can barely manage to land, let alone engage in aerial combat. Yesterday we had to launch 6 serviceable aircraft to confront an armada of 800 bombers and 600 escort fighters. This is no longer war. It's a senseless slaughter." Feldwebel Rudi Müller, head of technical services for JOG-3, meticulously recorded the operational readiness of the aircraft fleet in his diary, January 1944, 67% of fighters combat ready. March 1944, 45% serviceable, acute shortage of spare parts. May 1944, 31% operational, fuel deficit for necessary test flights. July 1944, only 18% of aircraft ready for sortie, catastrophic shortage of everything needed. "We are forced to cannibalize 3 aircraft to keep just 1 flying," he noted bitterly. "The Americans lose 50 planes in one raid and don't even notice. We, on the other hand, are paralyzed for a whole week after losing 5 aircraft. The devastating impact of Allied strategic bombing on the German fuel industry led to a chain reaction of negative consequences, greatly amplifying the numerical superiority of American air power. By spring 1944, systematic Allied air strikes against German synthetic fuel plants led to a catastrophic drop in aviation gasoline production, from an impressive 180,000 tons to a mere 20,000 tons per month. Oberst Hermann Graf, one of the Luftwaffe's most successful aces with 212 aerial victories, commanded JG-11 during that period. His unit's records documented a growing state of chaos. Training flights were cancelled to conserve fuel. Combat sorties were strictly limited to just 30-45 minutes. Combat-ready aircraft stood on airfields with full ammunition loads but no fuel. Pilots were strictly forbidden to pursue damaged enemy bombers to save precious remaining fuel. American pilots arrive with full fuel tanks, fight until the ammunition is exhausted, and calmly return to their bases, Graf wrote bitterly. We, however, take off with enough fuel for only 1 bomber attack and withdrawal. If we engage escort fighters, we have no fuel left to reach the bombers. If we attack the bombers, we have no way to escape the escort fighters. We are defeated before we even take off. Meanwhile, American aviation's appetite reached colossal proportions. In the European theater alone, approximately 75 million liters of aviation fuel were consumed monthly, significantly exceeding Germany's total production for all types of equipment and needs. June 6, 1944 entered history as D-Day, when Allied forces launched Operation Overlord in Normandy. This event served as tangible proof of the undisputed dominance of American air power in the European skies. Oberst Joseph Pips Priller, commander of JG-26, and his wingman, Unteroffizier Wodarczyk, were among the few German pilots who dared to attack the landing beachheads that day. Their solitary pass over Sword Beach was an act of desperation in the face of overwhelming Allied air superiority, after which they were forced to retreat under the assault of dozens of enemy fighters. Hitler's question, "Where is the Luftwaffe?" resonated as a reproach and evidence of the collapse of German air power. The stark numbers spoke for themselves. The Luftwaffe possessed only 319 combat-ready fighters in France and Belgium, while the Allies committed 11,590 aircraft to the battle. On D-Day alone, the US Army Air Forces conducted 8,122 sorties, while the Luftwaffe could only counter with 319. Oberleutnant Harold Quandt, serving with the Berntour JG-26 at Le Havre, left a poignant account in his diary of the atmosphere that day. We sat in shelters, listening to the radio traffic. Thousands of ships, thousands of planes. We had 7 serviceable fighters, just 7. The squadron commander forbade us to take off. It wouldn't be a battle, but cold-blooded murder, he said. These words convey the utter hopelessness of the situation in which German pilots found themselves, aware of their powerlessness against the crushing might of Allied air power. In the summer of 1944, the horizon of combat was illuminated by the appearance of the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter, briefly igniting a spark of hope in the hearts of some Luftwaffe pilots. This swift aircraft, capable of a maximum speed of 540 miles per hour, outmatched any Allied fighter by a full 100 miles per hour. Major Walter Nowotny, who led the world's first jet fighter unit, Commando Nowotny, initially believed that the Me-262 could reclaim lost air superiority. However, after 2 months of intense operations, he presented Garland with a sobering report that revealed the harsh truth. Jet aircraft are undoubtedly a revolutionary breakthrough, but their appearance is too late, and their numbers are catastrophically few. We have only 30 combat-ready Me-262s at our disposal, while the Americans today unleashed 1,500 bombers and 800 fighters on us. If we had 1,000 Me-262s, we could change the course of battles. But we'll be lucky if their number reaches even 100 by the end of the year. Tragedy struck Nowotny on November 8, 1944, when he was shot down by a P-51 Mustang while attempting to land his damaged Me-262. His last words, transmitted over the radio, were filled with despair. "I'm burning. There are too many of them." By the end of the war, Germany managed to produce 1,430 Myers Me-262s, but only about 300 of them saw actual combat. At the same time, American industry produced an astonishing 15,000 P-51 Mustangs, vividly demonstrating the colossal advantage in resources and production capabilities. The surviving veteran Luftwaffe pilots, who endured the crucible of aerial combat, left invaluable testimonies about the devastating psychological impact wrought by the relentless power of American industry. General of Fighters Adolf Garland, analyzing the events in his post-war memoirs, The First and the Last, bitterly stated, "By mid-1944 it became abundantly clear to me that the outcome of the war was predetermined. It was no longer about tactical maneuvers, pilot bravery, or technological innovations. It all boiled down to simple arithmetic. They could afford to lose 100 aircraft in one raid and replenish those losses in just 3 days. We, on the other hand, losing just 10 aircraft, could not count on replacing them." Major Erich Hartmann, the legendary ace with 352 aerial victories and the highest-scoring fighter pilot in aviation history, fought exclusively on the Eastern Front until 1945, but was transferred to the West in the final months of the war. His first encounter with American bomber armadas left a stunning impression on him. "I shot down dozens of Soviet planes, but what I saw here was completely different. The Americans flew in impeccable, geometrically precise formations. There were hundreds of them. Their defensive fire was a solid wall of tracer bullets. They continued to maintain formation even when attacked, when planes were burning and falling, taking pilots' lives. This was not heroism in its purest form. This was ruthless industrial warfare. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, whose career spanned 993 combat sorties and 176 aerial victories, later held high positions in the post-war Luftwaffe and on the NATO Military Committee. His profound reflections on the confrontation with overwhelming American air power are particularly valuable. He noted that German pilots, products of meticulous training and handcrafted equipment, faced a relentless industrial machine. While every German pilot underwent years of training and aircraft were almost hand-assembled, the Americans, as if on an assembly line, mass-produced both pilots and planes. Steinhoff bitterly concluded that destroying a B-17 yielded no tangible results, as 10 more would replace the downed bomber, whereas the loss of each Bf-109 was an irreplaceable blow. By the autumn of 1944, the decline of the Luftwaffe was not so much due to losses in air combat as to the systematic depletion of resources, fuel, skilled pilots, spare parts, and, most importantly, hope for a turning point in the war. Major Heinz, who ended the war with 220 victories, commanded JG-1 in its final year, and his unit's records vividly illustrate the progressive collapse. In September 1944, the unit had 40 pilots, but only 12 aircraft were serviceable. Recent reinforcements included 10 pilots, none of whom had more than 50 flying hours. The tragic outcome was the crash of 3 aircraft during landing, resulting in the deaths of 2 pilots. In October of the same year, fuel allocation was cut by 75%, allowing for only 1 combat sortie every 3 days. At the same time, American aircraft appeared in the sky daily, demonstrating their overwhelming superiority. November was marked by a desperate order to ram enemy bombers if ammunition ran out. Major Baer rightly assessed this not as combat, but as suicide, noting that even the Japanese, with their traditions of warrior sacrifice, had deeper reasons for such actions, while German pilots were called upon to die for lies. By December 1944, morale was utterly broken. The appearance of 1,000 American bombers over the airfield, with only 4 serviceable German aircraft available, led to the inevitable decision not to take off. The question of the purpose of further resistance hung in the air, requiring no answer. January 1st, 1945, was marked by Operation Bodenplatte, the final large-scale offensive action by the German Air Force, which vividly demonstrated the futility of confronting the colossal industrial potential of the United States. The Luftwaffe, gathering all available fighters in the western region, numbering between 850 and 900 units, launched a surprise attack on Allied airfields. This operation was the largest for German aviation in the preceding 12 months. The strike resulted in the destruction of 305 Allied aircraft, predominantly on the ground. However, the Allied response was immediate. Operations continued without any delay. Within 7 days, every lost aircraft was replaced. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe suffered irreplaceable losses, losing 271 aircraft and, most significantly, 143 experienced pilots killed or missing, including 3 squadron commanders and 5 group commanders. These losses proved impossible to replenish. Oberstleutnant Dietrich Peltz, the operations designer, later admitted, "In one morning, we destroyed more Allied aircraft than in the previous 3 months. But it didn't matter, because they replaced all losses in a matter of days. We, on the other hand, lost experienced pilots whom we could not replace. It was a mortal blow we dealt ourselves." February 1945 brought final defeat. The Luftwaffe could barely offer even symbolic resistance to the massive raids of thousands of bombers systematically destroying German cities. For instance, on February 3, 1945, American forces dispatched 1,437 B-17 and B-24 bombers, escorted by 948 fighters, for a daytime bombing of Berlin. The Luftwaffe could only scramble 28 fighters to defend the capital, 23 of which were shot down. Lieutenant Walter Hagener, who piloted one of the surviving fighters, described the event. "We climbed into a stream of bombers. It was like flying into a cloud, but the cloud was made of aluminum and death. Escort fighters, like vigilant guardians, surrounded the bombers in multiple layers. Hundreds of Mustangs and Thunderbolts formed an impenetrable aerial shield around them. A bomber crew would make one pass, unleashing a barrage of fire from its onboard guns, then swiftly dive away. The pilot could not be certain if his fire reached its target, as there were countless bombers around, making it virtually impossible to determine the result of his shot." March 1945 became the visible embodiment of American industry's triumph. Intelligence reaching Luftwaffe headquarters confirmed the colossal superiority of the US in aviation manufacturing. In 1944 alone, American factories produced 96,318 aircraft, of which 35,000 were heavy four-engine bombers. Additionally, 38,173 fighters were manufactured. These production volumes continue to grow steadily. Germany's total aircraft production for 1944 was only 3,987 units, with fighters accounting for just 25,185 of these. However, most of these machines never took to the air due to a severe shortage of fuel, experienced pilots, and necessary spare parts. Germany managed to produce 24,981 fighters during 1944, reaching peak monthly figures in the autumn, shortly before massive Allied bombings of synthetic fuel plants paralyzed aviation production. Major Wolfgang Falk, a prominent figure and founder of the Luftwaffe's night fighter force, conducted impressive calculations. He determined that a colossal 1.46 million tons of American bombs had been dropped on German territory. This destructive power was equivalent to the explosion of 33 Hiroshima atomic bombs. Notably, bombing accuracy continuously improved thanks to the implementation of advanced radar systems and navigational equipment. By spring 1945, American bomber crews demonstrated astonishing precision, hitting targets within a 300-meter radius in 90% of cases, operating from an altitude of 7,600 meters. Falk bitterly concluded that the war had devolved into a soulless mathematical problem, where a certain number of tons of bombs corresponded to a specific volume of destruction. The number of fighters determined air superiority, and the quantity of trained pilots guaranteed victory. He emphasized that Germany was not defeated in a fair fight, but rather mathematically annihilated by the enemy's overwhelming numerical superiority and technological progress. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe, once a formidable force, had virtually ceased to exist, remaining only a phantom on paper. Out of the 1,500 fighters listed, barely 50 machines could take to the air. Oberst Gordon Golob, an ace with 150 aerial victories, was appointed commander of the Reich Fighter Defense in April 1945, but faced a disheartening reality. He could find no fuel for operations, no ammunition to arm the aircraft, no sufficient number of pilots capable of flying them, no spare parts to repair damaged equipment, and no airfields untouched by constant enemy attacks. Ultimately, his first and last order as commander was a bitter admission of defeat. Save the planes for museums, save the pilots for their families. The war is over. After the end of World War II, captured Luftwaffe pilots detailed the demoralizing impact of overwhelming American air power. General Lieutenant Josef Schmid, who served as the last commander of Luftwaffe West, testified as part of the US Strategic Bombing Survey, revealing the depth of despair that gripped German aviators. Schmid admitted, "From 1943, our efforts were not aimed at achieving victory, but at delaying inevitable defeat." Every pilot taking to the sky knew that he would face an enemy outnumbering him 10 times or even more. They knew that in every mission they would have to confront an armada of 1,000 bombers. This was not a battle of equals, but rather an industrial meat grinder, where the chances of survival were negligible. Major Georg Peter Eder, an ace with 78 victories, including the destruction of 36 four-engine bombers, shared the evolution of his views on the war. In 1943, I still believed we could stop their onslaught through superior tactics and the bravery of our pilots. However, by early 1944, I realized that we needed some kind of wonder weapon to turn the tide of the war. And by the end of 1944, I understood we needed a real miracle to escape. The Americans turned aerial warfare into a ruthless conveyor belt of death. We fought not just planes, but entire corporations such as Ford, Boeing, Douglas, Lockheed, Republic, North American, and Consolidated. We simply had no chance of winning. The final statistics of the air war present a picture of the colossal imbalance of forces that the German Air Force, known as the Luftwaffe, faced. American industry between 1942 and 1945 demonstrated unprecedented power, producing approximately 300,000 aircraft of all types. A significant portion of this total consisted of 35,000 heavy four-engine bombers intended for strategic operations. Fighter aircraft were also produced in substantial numbers, around 950 units. To support this enormous air fleet, 2.3 million aircraft engines were manufactured, and 800,000 pilots were trained. At the same time, the German aviation industry produced 977 aircraft of various types during the same period. However, the production of the He-177 heavy four-engine bombers was extremely limited, only 194 units. The number of fighters produced amounted to 53,329 units. Pilot training also lagged significantly behind the American effort. Only 28,000 personnel, with the quality of training steadily declining due to a shortage of resources and time. The difference in air losses also speaks volumes. The US Army Air Forces lost 18,369 aircraft in Europe, which constituted only 6.1% of their total production. German losses were catastrophic, 57,000 aircraft, or 48% of what was produced. Losses among American aircrew amounted to 94,565 personnel, corresponding to 11.8% of the total number of trained pilots. German aircrew losses reached 46,055 personnel, which exceeded the number of trained pilots by 157%, indicating that many pilots were shot down multiple times before being permanently incapacitated. By May 1945, the military might of the United States had reached its zenith. It commanded an impressive 41,163 combat aircraft. Meanwhile, Germany, once a formidable air power, could only muster the paltry remnants of its aviation, numbering no more than 100 machines. Luftwaffe pilots, having endured the crucible of war, underwent profound psychological changes, beginning their combat careers as the dominant force in the sky, achieving victories from Spain to Poland and France. They ended it by hiding their aircraft in forests, desperately hoping to conserve enough fuel for just one more mission. Hauptmann Franz von Vera, who made history as the only German prisoner of war to successfully escape Allied captivity and return home, reported to Göring as early as 1941 about the colossal industrial potential of America he had witnessed firsthand. However, his warnings were met with disdain and branded as defeatist sentiments. The Reichsmarschall accused me of succumbing to enemy propaganda, von Vera recalled. He simply could not imagine the existence of such immense industrial power. Oberleutnant Hans Ulrich Rudel, the most decorated German serviceman of World War II, who flew 1,230 combat missions, predominantly on the Eastern Front, personally encountered overwhelming American air power in 1945. His observation was truly striking. The Soviets had quantity. The Americans had quantity that worked perfectly. Every bomber was flawless. Every fighter was perfectly maintained. The pilots were well fed, well rested, and well trained. We sent exhausted boys in patched up planes with empty stomachs against them. World War II relentlessly devoured resources and lives, a tragic reality reflected in the bitter words of German airmen. Luftwaffe Major Heinz Knoke, an ace with 2,000 combat sorties and 33 aerial victories, meticulously documented the metamorphosis in the balance of power throughout the war. His records are a merciless chronicle of the decline of German aviation. In 1943, German fighters, according to Knoke, challenged bomber armadas numbering between 60 and 100 aircraft. This was risky, but remained within reach for a group of 20-30 fighters. By early 1944, the situation had drastically changed. German pilots now had to contend with formations numbering between 200 and 300 bombers, protected by 100 escort fighters. To have any impact, the mobilization of all available forces was required. By the end of 1944, Allied air superiority became overwhelming. Waves consisting of 500-750 bombers, accompanied by 400 fighters, descended upon German cities. German pilots, with barely a dozen combat-ready aircraft at their disposal, could only helplessly watch the aerial giants flying past. In 1945, Allied air power reached its peak. Over 1,000 bombers, escorted by 800 fighters, crisscrossed the skies of Germany. German pilots, deprived of the ability to resist, remained grounded, awaiting the inevitable end. Major Knoke's last entry, dated May 7, 1945, is filled with bitterness and an admission of defeat. The Americans could have won using just a tenth of what they threw at us. But they threw everything into the battle to prove their point, and they proved it. Perhaps nothing so vividly illustrates the Luftwaffe's acknowledgement of its defeat as the secret recording of a conversation involving Generaloberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpf, who commanded the Reich's air fleet. This discussion with his fellow prisoners in May 1945 was secretly taped by British intelligence and contains startling revelations. Stumpf stated, "Gentlemen, we were crushed not by the valor or skill of the enemy. The Americans certainly displayed bravery, but no more than us. Their pilots demonstrated experience, but didn't surpass our aces. We were broken by manufacturing power. They produced more in a month than we did in a year. They trained more pilots in a week than we did in 6 months. They dropped more bombs in a single raid than we dropped on England the entire war." The general emphasized that this was a new type of warfare, an industrial execution. The Americans had turned their entire country into a giant aircraft factory. Women who previously assembled washing machines were now making aircraft parts. Men who built cars switched to producing bombers. They approached the war like a business, meticulously planning everything according to spreadsheets, production quotas, and efficiency metrics. We fought with the fervor of warriors, Stumpf concluded, while they fought with the precision of accountants, and the accountants prevailed. For many Luftwaffe pilots, a tipping point arrived when it became clear that the outcome of the war was predetermined. These revelations, drawn from memoirs, interviews, and personal correspondence, vividly demonstrate the psychological shock of confronting the enemy's insurmountable industrial might. Pilot Allison described his feelings. A first formation was followed by a second, then a third, and so on. I counted 7 combat groups, each with 54 bombers. And this was just one of 3 raids that day. Upon landing, I told my commander, "The war is lost. We just haven't fully realized it yet." Hauptmann Wilhelm Batz of JG-52 recalled April 1944. "We managed to shoot down 11 B-17s in a single sortie. It was our most successful day ever." However, the very next morning, the Americans sent 50 more bombers than the day before. Our victory was completely insignificant against the backdrop of their resources. Major Klaus Meitisch of JG-26 shared his impressions from September 1944. A B-17 with 2 engines out and a damaged tail continued to fly, fought back, and maintained its position in formation. Its gunners destroyed 2 of our best pilots. This seemingly doomed bomber posed a greater threat than our best fighters. It was then that I realized the full power of the American war machine. Even their damaged aircraft remained deadly. While raw numbers demonstrated a growing superiority, America's technological advancement further widened the gap between the warring parties. Each new model of American aircraft marked a step forward, surpassing its predecessor in every aspect. At the same time, the German aviation industry, suffering from a severe shortage of resources, could not afford large-scale development, leading to stagnation. A prime example of American superiority was the B-17G bomber, introduced in late 1943, which featured a range of advanced solutions. A Bendix chin turret, armed with 2 heavy 12.7mm machine guns, significantly increased firepower. An improved Norden bombsight, integrated with an autopilot, provided unprecedented bombing accuracy. Electronic turbochargers ensured stable engine performance at high altitudes, where thin air posed problems for German aircraft. Radar navigation systems allowed American crews to navigate in complex weather conditions and at night. Chaff dispensers, designed to disorient German radars, reduced the effectiveness of enemy air defenses. In contrast, German fighters, due to resource scarcity, underwent design simplification to accelerate production rates. Cockpit heating systems were eliminated, negatively impacting pilot comfort in winter conditions. Electrical systems were replaced with manual ones, reducing aircraft reliability and functionality. Substitute materials were increasingly used in construction as aluminum became scarcer. Armor protection was reduced to save weight, making aircraft more vulnerable to enemy fire. Radios were removed from training aircraft, complicating the instruction of new pilots. Oberleutnant Heinrich Eschler, a Luftwaffe ace with 208 victories, bitterly stated, "Every month American aircraft get better. Every month ours get worse. They add guns, we remove armor. They improve engines, we dilute fuel. They perfect electronics, we remove radios. "We are moving backward while they accelerate forward." These words vividly reflected the technological chasm that divided Germany and the United States in World War II. A striking comparison of pilot training levels, like a bright spotlight, illuminated the impossibility of a German triumph in air battles. By 1944, the American pilot training program had reached impressive heights. Each pilot had over 200 total flight hours, with more than 75 hours dedicated to mastering combat aircraft. The course included 50 hours of gunnery practice and 40 hours of formation flying. Unlimited fuel supplies allowed for training without concern for economy, and the absence of combat conditions created ideal learning environments. In the German Air Force, the situation was diametrically opposite. Pilots' total flight hours ranged from 110 to 160 hours, a sharp reduction from 450 hours in 1941. Only 15-20 hours were allocated to mastering combat aircraft, and gunnery training was limited to 5 hours. Formation flying was out of the question. Severe fuel rationing constrained the training process, and airfields were constantly under enemy attack, creating a dangerous environment. Oberst Hannes Trautloft, inspector of fighter aircraft, stated in his desperate report in December 1944, "We are sending children to certain death. They do not possess the art of piloting, let alone fighting. They are unable to hold formation, shoot accurately, or even land safely. 8 out of 10 newly minted pilots arriving at units die within 2 weeks." These words, full of bitterness and despair, became a tragic testament to the collapse of German aviation. By the end of 1944, complete despondency and disillusionment reigned within the Luftwaffe. The morale of German pilots plummeted to a critical low, reflected in a monstrous 400% increase in pilot suicides. Desertion, previously unseen in the German Air Force, became a common occurrence. Individual pilots, driven by fear and desperation, deliberately sabotaged their combat aircraft to avoid participating in deadly sorties. Secret SS reports from that period, made available after the war, vividly document this profound crisis. SS Sturmbannführer Wilhelm Damberg noted in his December 1944 report, "Fighter pilots openly declare the war lost. They refer to combat sorties as nothing less than suicidal. Some pilots, having taken to the air, fire all their ammunition over territory controlled by our troops, and upon returning to base, report an alleged engagement with the enemy. The morale of the personnel cannot be restored by propaganda tricks or harsh punishments. People have seen with their own eyes the overwhelming power of the enemy." In an attempt to turn the tide, the Luftwaffe resorted to increasingly desperate measures. Assault groups were ordered to ram enemy bombers. Special Ramjager units were formed for suicide attacks. The number of courts-martial dealing with cowardice and desertion increased by 800%. Threats of sending pilots' families to concentration camps were employed. However, all these measures proved futile. German pilots had seen and understood too much to believe in victory. March 18, 1945, marked the day of final collapse for German aviation. On this day, a massive air fleet, consisting of 1,329 American heavy bombers and 730 fighters, descended upon Berlin in broad daylight. In a desperate attempt to defend the Reich's capital, the Luftwaffe could only scramble 37 fighters. Despite their technological superiority, the Me-262 jet aircraft managed to shoot down only 8 enemy bombers. Allied escort fighters, in turn, destroyed 25 German fighters, including 5 jet aircraft. Adolf Galland, a celebrated ace who piloted the Me-262 with JV-44, an elite squadron comprising Germany's most successful pilots, recalled that day with bitterness. He spoke of the feeling of helplessness that gripped the pilots, who realized the futility of their efforts. Each of them, Barkhorn, Hohagen, Kinski, Lützow, had over 100 aerial victories to their name. Together they had destroyed more than 1,000 enemy aircraft, but now they were powerless to change anything. Galland compared them to insects trying to stop an oncoming avalanche. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe, once a formidable force, had effectively ceased to exist. American bombers, painted in bright aluminum, traversed the skies over Germany unimpeded, no longer needing camouflage. They flew directly to their targets without evading enemy fire. Fighter escort was often cancelled as unnecessary, as air resistance was practically non-existent. In April 1945, according to 8th Air Force mission reports, the airspace over Germany was virtually undefended. Enemy aircraft were absent, anti-aircraft fire was not encountered, and targets were destroyed without any resistance, turning combat sorties into mere training exercises. Statistics on Luftwaffe sortie intensity clearly demonstrate the collapse of German aviation. While in May 1940, during the Battle of France, German aviation conducted approximately 5,000 sorties daily, and in August of the same year, during the Battle of Britain, about 3,000 by June 1944, when the Allies landed in Normandy. This figure had fallen to 319. In March 1945, the Luftwaffe was carrying out 50 to 100 sorties per day, and by May 1945, fewer than 10. After Germany's surrender, the US Strategic Bombing Survey interviewed hundreds of Luftwaffe personnel. These testimonies, declassified in the 1960s, provided compelling evidence of the overwhelming power of American industry. General Feldmarschall Erhard Milch, who served as General Inspector of the Luftwaffe, admitted that, according to intelligence, America was producing 8,000 aircraft per month by 1944. These figures seemed unbelievable to the Germans. Germany's best result was in the autumn of 1944, when it managed to approach 4,000 aircraft. However, intelligence had underestimated. American industry was actually producing 9,000 aircraft monthly. Milch wondered how one could wage war against a country that produced more aircraft in 2 months than Germany did in 2 years. As Luftwaffe Generaloberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpf acknowledged, the outcome of modern warfare is decided not only by soldiers on the front lines, but also by workers on the home front. Every American bomber that appeared in the skies over Germany embodied the colossal efforts of thousands of workers engaged in factories, coal mines, and oil refineries. Thus, German pilots had to contend not so much with enemy pilots as with the industrial potential of American cities like Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Seattle. Summarizing the air war, it is clear what an insurmountable task the Luftwaffe faced. The United States of America demonstrated its impressive capacity for military production. Specifically, U.S. bomber production reached 35,000 units, while Germany managed to produce only 194 four-engine bombers. This ratio, and 29-to-1 loss, clearly demonstrates the disparity in manufacturing capabilities. Between 1941 and 1945, the US produced 19,950 fighters, compared to Germany's 53,729. The ratio of 1.9 to 1 also indicates a significant superiority in American industry. Pilot training in the US was also superior. On average, each pilot logged over 200 hours before engaging in combat. In Germany, by 1944, this figure ranged from 110 to 160 hours, a ratio of 1.5 to 1 points to better training for American pilots. Finally, fuel availability also played a crucial role. While the US experienced no shortage of fuel, Germany could meet only 10% of its needs by 1945. By 1945, the air war had reached its climax, showcasing a colossal difference in capabilities between the opposing sides. US Army Air Forces conducted over 8,000 sorties daily, while Germany could only respond with about 100. This 80-to-1 ratio vividly demonstrated the overwhelming superiority of the American war machine. Such a disproportion of forces had a profound psychological impact on German pilots, leaving an indelible mark on their psyches. Many subsequently suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, caused by constant encounters with a demonstrably superior enemy. Dr. Hans Joachim Lemon, a Luftwaffe physician who later became a psychiatrist, dedicated the 1950s to studying the psychological state of fighter veterans. According to Dr. Lemon, German pilots experienced a unique trauma related not so much to personal experiences as to the realization of their nation's powerlessness in the face of American industrial might. They witnessed the deaths of comrades in battles, where the enemy seemed oblivious to its own losses. German pilots felt not just defeat, but a loss of significance, an awareness of their inability to change the course of the war. In 1962, a meeting of former Luftwaffe fighter pilots was held in Munich, where Adolf Galland, as the main speaker, reflected on the lessons learned from confronting American air power. This event became a platform for reflecting on the past and evaluating the impact of technological superiority on the war's outcome. During World War II, the confrontation with American military power became a revelation for US adversaries. Johannes Steinhoff, once a Luftwaffe ace and later a high-ranking NATO commander, shared his recollections and reflections on this experience. Steinhoff emphasized that modern warfare demonstrated the superiority of industrial potential over military force in its purest form. Factories and assembly lines proved more crucial than airfields and front lines, and workers became more valuable than warriors. America proved that industrial democracy could produce more than totalitarian regimes with their apparent efficiency. The might of American production literally buried its adversaries under its weight. However, according to Steinhoff, the Americans taught another important lesson. They not only won, but also rebuilt the defeated nations. They protected them from Soviet expansion and transformed enemies into allies. This became their greatest achievement. The essence was not in the ability to produce hundreds of thousands of aircraft, but in the wise decision to use that power for reconstruction, not punishment. Speaking on April 26, 1985, at the US Air Force Academy on the 40th anniversary of his capture, Steinhoff addressed young officers to share his experience of confronting American air power. He described how the horizon blackened with bombers, how they had to conserve ammunition, counting it in seconds, while the Americans had it in abundance. The best pilots, who had endured 5 years of fighting, perished in minutes. But most importantly, it was a demonstration of incredible power unleashed by a democratic industry. Every B-17 bomber that appeared over Germany was a testament to the labor of American workers, America's resources, and unwavering resolve. Steinhoff emphasized that America won not only because of its wealth, but also because of its ability to mobilize its resources as a free country. Free workers outperformed forced labor. Free enterprise proved more effective than state control, and free citizens surpassed fanatical warriors. Steinhoff's personal experience, having flown 993 combat missions and shot down 176 aircraft, yet being shot down himself 12 times, led him to realize an important truth. His most important mission became the long journey from Nazi fanatic to democratic citizen, from enemy to ally, from defeat to understanding. He stressed that the ancestors of the young Americans did not merely defeat their adversaries, they transformed them, showing that power comes not from conquest, but from production, not from ideology, but from industry, not from hatred, but from humanity. The bombings were destructive, but the reconstruction proved transformative. Those who once filled the skies as enemies now gathered as friends. This is America's true victory, the triumph of American industry, the story of the Luftwaffe's collapse. The Luftwaffe's recognition of its impending defeat was, in essence, a tale of colossal industrial might, a force that crushes, knows no mercy, and is beyond doubt. When Hauptmann Heinz Knoke gazed at the formation of 291 B-17s over Schweinfurt in October 1943, he understood that he was not merely facing an enemy armada. He saw the embodiment of Germany's mathematically predetermined collapse. Each bomber was like a monument to 1.2 million rivets, meticulously placed by American workers. Each aircraft engine comprised 7,000 parts, machined with surgical precision. Every crew member represented over 200 hours of grueling training. When multiplied across thousands of bombing raids, the equation became insurmountable. The aces of the Luftwaffe were, without question, among the most outstanding fighter pilots in aviation history. Many boasted over 100 aerial victories, some even more than 200. Erich Hartmann, for instance, achieved an incredible 352 downed aircraft. Yet, heroism and bravery could not content with the cold, hard numbers of industrial production. The highest piloting skill proved powerless against relentless statistics. Courage could not overcome industrial might. Ultimately, every Luftwaffe pilot who cast an eye upon the gleaming aluminum armor of American bombers understood the same bitter truth. They were not merely fighting an opposing air force. They were up against an entire nation that had mobilized all its resources for military production. And this nation could afford to lose 100 bombers one day and dispatch 200 more the next morning. The outcome of the war was predetermined the moment American industry reached its peak production capacity. The Luftwaffe pilots were simply the first to grasp this. It was written in the skies by vast formations of flying fortresses, stretching from horizon to horizon, an endless river of aluminum, sweeping towards the heart of the Reich, carrying not only deadly bombs, but also the mathematical proof of Germany's inevitable defeat. Seeing hundreds of American bombers, they understood that the war was lost. Not because of the destruction these bombers could inflict, but because of what they represented, the boundless industrial potential of an awakened democracy. In this recognition lay both defeat and ultimately redemption. For in witnessing American power, they also saw America's noble objective, not the conquest of new territories, but the liberation of oppressed peoples, not vengeance, but the restoration of what was destroyed, not hatred, but the hope that former enemies could become steadfast allies. The industrial verdict had been delivered, and the Luftwaffe became its unwitting witnesses. In witnessing it, they learned an undeniable truth that would forever change the post-war world. Industrial democracy was the most powerful force on earth, and America was its primary arsenal.